Hello. Yesterday, Obama made the biggest decision of his entire presidency so far, and that was to send 30,000 troops to um, Afghanistan. Now, how much of this was a military decision or a political decision? Where Crystal, the head of the U.S. forces in Afghanistan, asked for 45,000 troops. Also, Obama gave a clear cut timetable for withdrawal now in 18 months. Now, two different opposing views have suddenly become one, that the war is lost, okay? And that is the Republican right and the Taliban themselves. They both believe that the the war for the Republicans privately um, will not be won in 18 months. Okay? But there may be more to this 18 months timetable than meets the eye. For instance, the Taliban may be brought out from their hiding places by overconfidence. Okay? And because of that, they'll be able to be destroyed easier or pushed into Pakistan, into the tribal areas. Now, Pakistan obviously doesn't like this, and they hear American voices speaking of we are allies, we are, but the Americans are not fools. Okay, the Americans know that the ISI supports the Taliban and Al Qaeda. They have done from the very point that Al Qaeda separated itself from the Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt. Okay, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan are so heavily linked to Al Qaeda. Right, this is a key point in the strategy. Okay, I believe that Obama may be making it for political reasons, but the people above Obama would have told him that 18 months is necessary for strategic reasons. That is both economic, military, and from an intelligence point of view. Now, this really will clearly separate those Pakistanis who are pro Western and pro American or pro Pakistan from the ISI, which is a rogue intelligence. Their rogue intelligence agency. It's called the uh, Inter-Services Agency. Okay. Now, if the Taliban in Afghanistan are forced across the border, reinforcing the Pakistani Taliban, this will mean that Pakistan is in a clear and present danger to itself as a functioning state, and it will then have to fight on the side of the Americans. So, in one from one point of view, it may look really foolish thing to say 18 months. But on the other hand, it might be more of a clear strategy. If it was a selfish political reason from Obama, which probably does come into it because, of course, after 2011, there will be the new American elections. I think they will be the midterm elections, if I'm correct. And Obama doesn't want to be like LBJ, involved in Vietnam, and have a one-term Lyndon Baines Johnson to have a one-term presidency. Okay, now what will be the effect of the deployment of these troops? Well, I think really although of course the ISI and will have some sort of ability to get information from the Western intelligence services because they have to work so closely together, and then the ISI will give it to Al Qaeda and Taliban anyway. But we've been almost too open, I think. they come from a neo-feudalist society where secrecy is so ingrained in their culture. Okay, they don't tell people when they're going to change sides, because they often do. Most of the Taliban changed sides to the Northern Alliance after the Americans came in, and now they've changed back to the Taliban. And increasingly, it's the people who are in between, the ordinary citizens who are supplying the Taliban in the south, because they are Pashtuns. Now, simply providing that Afghanistan as a state, a national army, even if they double the size to 130,000, doesn't mean that the Pashtuns will accept them in the south, because they may be Afghan soldiers to us, but to Pashtuns they are a separate ethnicity coming into the south. So I think really the only way to solve this problem is to partition the country effectively. Now that's already effectively happened, because there are shadow governments with the seeming legitimate governors who have been elected or been placed there by the Americans. There are shadow governors set there by the Taliban, and that's who everybody looks to. It's like the mafia in Sicily. So, if these American forces are to be spread out across the country, it won't make that much difference. What will make a difference is if you concentrate, like the British have done in Helmand. Now, although there's only 10,000 British troops there from the American point of view, from the British point of view, there's 10,000 troops. That's a lot of troops to us. Okay, we've got a much smaller military than you, but arguably, even the Americans will say, and even the American Marines, that the British troops are trained to a higher standard, and the SAS are unrivalled recognised throughout the world as the best troops. So that is a significant use of troops. Now, of course, we are dependent on America for air power and transference there, but the British have already said that they're willing to keep on fighting in Helmand province in some form for another 15 years. And this is really what Obama, I believe, should have said. Unless he's looking for a decisive battle like there was in Iraq at Fallujah, and in Anbar province, which caused the so-called awakening, where Sunni fighters who had been fighting for Al-Qaeda switched sides because of the pressures from their tribal structure. Now, a similar tribal structure may exist in Afghanistan, but the loyalties aren't as solid. Okay, I'm going to do a part 2 on this, because I think it needs to carry on. But there's clearly the religious fervour that brought the Taliban in. Most of that was really concentrated in the foreign fighters, whereas the Afghans themselves are of course religious and pretend to be religious on the outside, but they are and have those religious ethics of Islam, but really they're drinkers, they're and they've got some, from what I've heard from soldiers who've come back there, some rather strange sexual mores, let's say. Okay, but I don't want to demonise all Afghans or all Pashtuns. Okay, the Americans will surely have to, like in Fallujah in Iraq, reduce the Taliban around Kandahar, and that's probably where their main focus will be, where they leave a sizable minority of their forces in Helmand to help the British, and focus on Kandahar province and Kandahar city itself, because that is the heartland of the Taliban. We may see something similar to the fight around Moscow in the Second World War, where you had the ideological heartland of a society threatened by a Western force. And the Americans may have to really reduce Kandahar significantly, but this will be still a war of infiltration rather than a collision. I'll see you in part 2.